Look at the rankings. Look at the draw sheet for Wimbledon. Somewhere between those two documents, a 21-year-old from Manila just rewrote what is possible for Philippine tennis. And if you blinked over the last 2 weeks, you missed one of the most stunning individual runs in recent WTA memory. This is not hype. This is not a feel-good filler segment. This is a documented, statistically verified changing of the guard. And the biggest names in the sport are already on record admitting it. We need to talk about what happened in Berlin because the ripple effects of those 48 hours are still being felt at the All England Club right now. And we need to talk about the moment a young Filipina player stood on court 1 at the Steffi Graf Stadium, racket hanging loosely from her hand, tears in her eyes, barely able to process what she had just done to one of her childhood idols. Her name is Eala. And if you are not paying attention to her yet, you are behind. Let quote S set the scene properly, because the emotion of that Berlin quarterfinal tells you everything about the magnitude of the moment. Eala had just defeated Elena Svitolina in straight sets, 6-3, 6-4. Svitolina is not a name you stumble into beating by accident. She is a former world number 3, a 2018 WTA finals champion, a player with 20 career singles titles. And when the final point landed, Eala didn't pump her fist or scream in triumph. She stood frozen, overwhelmed, her hand covering her mouth as the tears came. Across the net, Svitolina walked forward to congratulate her, and there was something almost poetic about it, because Eala had grown up in Manila watching Svitolina compete on television. This wasn't just a win. This was a fan defeating her idol on the sport's biggest stage. But here is the detail that should stop you in your tracks. That victory over Svitolina was not even the biggest story of Eala's week. It wasn't even the biggest story of her previous 24 hours.
With a lot of pressure on Eala, that's the biggest challenge of the tour.
The world.
Just one night earlier, in the round of 16, Eala had already dismantled the tournament's second seed, Elena Rybakina, 7-5, 6-4. Let that sink in for a moment. Rybakina is the 2022 Wimbledon champion. She is widely regarded as one of the cleanest ball strikers in the entire sport. And on grass, her serve is considered one of the most dangerous weapons in women's tennis. That is precisely the surface where you are not supposed to be able to out-hit her. And yet Rybakina, the 2022 Wimbledon champion, is widely regarded as one of the cleanest ball strikers in women's tennis. And on grass, her powerful serve is one of the most dangerous weapons on the WTA tour. Yet Eala neutralized that advantage and defeated her in straight sets on the surface, where Rybakina has enjoyed her greatest success. 2 top 10 scalps in less than 48 hours. Not against fading veterans coasting on reputation, but against 2 players squarely inside the sport's elite, on the surface where Eala had the least experience of her career. This marked Eala's 6th career win over a top 10 opponent and her 2nd in less than 48 hours. When something like that happens once, you call it a great week. When it happens twice in one tournament on a surface that was supposed to expose her weaknesses, you have to start calling it something else entirely. A pattern. Now, before we go further, let's address the numbers, because the box score against Svitolina tells a story that contradicts everything people thought they knew about this young player. On paper, the serving stats actually favored Svitolina. Against Elena Svitolina in the quarterfinal, the ace count favored the Ukrainian. Svitolina struck 4 aces while Eala managed just 1. If this were a story about power, Eala should have lost that match. But tennis is not decided by who hits the ball harder. It's decided by who makes fewer mistakes when it matters. And according to the broadcast numbers, Svitolina finished with 23 unforced errors, while Eala committed only 9. Eala won 13 of the 22 points on Svitolina's first serve and claimed 21 of the 42 points on her second serve against a former world number 3 on one of her best surfaces. That is not a fluke. That is not a hot streak. That is a masterclass in discipline against one of the most decorated returners the sport has seen in the last decade. This is exactly why Tracy Austin, a 2-time U.S. Open champion and a member of the International Tennis Hall of Fame, chose her words so carefully in the immediate aftermath. Austin has spent more than 5 decades around this sport, and she does not hand out praise lightly. Her assessment, relayed through on-site coverage, focused on 2 specific qualities. She has been so sturdy mentally. What an impressive last game. Down 0-30 and somehow found a way. She served well, did just enough variation with her serve, with her spins, driving the ball to make Svitolina feel uncomfortable. Sturdy? Variation. Those are not the words commentators use to describe a talented kid who got lucky. Those are the words reserved for a player who has already built the mental architecture to compete with the very best in the world. And everyone in that broadcast booth knew it. Here, quote S, what makes this even more remarkable. For the better part of 2 years, the story surrounding this young player had been written for her before she ever had the chance to write it herself. She was a powerful left-hander, the groundstroke hitter, the player whose only path to victory ran through raw pace. Berlin tore that narrative apart. What we actually witnessed was a tactician extending rallies just long enough to make her opponent hit one extra uncomfortable shot. Patience decided that match, not power. So, how did we get here? Let's rewind because the road to Berlin matters just as much as what happened once she got there. Before this tournament, Eala carried a reputation that was cautiously optimistic at best. She had already produced a career-defining run in Miami back in 2025, taking down 4 top 30 opponents on her way to the semifinals, including a win over Iga Swiatek. That run should have been the moment the tennis world sat up and paid attention permanently. Instead, many chose to file it away as a fluke, a perfect storm of fast, hard courts and a passionate home crowd of Filipino fans packing the stands. It was a memorable achievement, sure, but it was viewed through a lens of skepticism about whether she could ever repeat it somewhere else on a different surface without the crowd behind her. Entering Berlin, the resume backed up that skepticism. She had beaten exactly one top 10 player outside of Miami. She had never beaten a top 10 opponent on grass in her career. And buried in the statistics was a number that seemed irrelevant at the time. Her record against Czech players stood at a brutal 1 win and 13 losses. This was a player respected for her ceiling, but not yet feared for her floor. Nobody was circling her name on a schedule and bracing for a fight. She was, at best, a name to keep an eye on. Berlin changed all of that in the span of 2 nights. The upgrade to her ranking tells the story in cold, hard numbers. According to week-by-week tracking, Eala's run to the Berlin semifinals, even though it ended there, lifted her to a career-high ranking of around world number 30, up from approximately number 35 the previous week and roughly number 49 at the beginning of the season. That is not incremental improvement. That is a full-scale ranking explosion happening in real time, live on tour in front of everyone, and that surge earned her the number 29 seed heading into Wimbledon, meaning she walked into the year's most prestigious grass court tournament for the first time in her career as a protected, seeded player, no longer forced into the brutal early round lottery that unseeded players dread. Think about what that actually means. Instead of being the dangerous floater who could knock out a seed in round 1, she became the target. The player everyone else on tour now has to game plan around. The balance of power in that draw shifted, and it shifted because of what happened on a tennis court in Berlin over the course of one single week. And then, just when the story seemed like it had already peaked, Eala kept writing it. On July 2nd, 2026, she defeated Mayar Sharif in the second round at Wimbledon to reach the third round of a Grand Slam for the very first time in her career. In doing so, she made history that cannot be undone. She became the first Filipino woman ever to reach the third round of a Grand Slam singles tournament, a milestone confirmed through Wimbledon's own official channels. Just 2 years ago, the Philippines had never produced a seeded Grand Slam player at all. Now the country has a player not just seeded, but advancing into the second week of one of the sport's 4 biggest events. That is not a footnote. That is a nation's tennis history being rewritten in real time. Now let's talk about the person who called this before almost anyone else did, because this is where the story gets even more interesting. World number 1. Aryna Sabalenka has been remarkably candid about her admiration for this young Filipina star, and crucially, her comments were not some reactionary praise offered up after a shocking upset. Months before Berlin ever happened, Sabalenka sat down for a full-length interview with ABS-CBN titled appropriately, Born for Center Court. In that interview, the reigning number 1 in the world spoke about Eala with what can only be described as genuine anticipation, the kind of respect typically reserved for players already being groomed for greatness. Following Eala's win in Berlin, Sabalenka doubled down publicly, stating she would like to play another final against her after acknowledging her own difficult start to a match. This is not a case of the tennis world jumping on a bandwagon after the fact. This is the reigning world #1 being proven right live in real time on the tour's biggest stages. So where does that leave the broader conversation about this young player's career? Let's be honest about what's still missing, because credibility in this sport requires honesty, not just celebration. Eala has now recorded top 10 victories on hard courts in Miami and on grass in Berlin. That is genuine cross-surface success, the kind that separates players who catch fire for one lucky week from players who are building sustainable elite-level careers. But she has yet to record a top 10 win on clay. That is not a criticism. That is simply the next box left to check, the next question left to answer. And based on everything we've just watched unfold over the last several weeks, does anyone seriously want to bet against her figuring that out too? Because here's the uncomfortable truth for every player left in that Wimbledon draw. This week, Eala officially entered one of the most exclusive rooms in tennis, the 32-seated players at Wimbledon, sharing that space with names like Aryna Sabalenka, Elena Rybakina, Jessica Pegula, and Svitolina herself. Two of those names are players she has already beaten on grass in the same tournament. Within 48 hours of each other, the conversation around Eala has officially moved past potential. Potential is a word for players who haven't proven anything yet. What we are watching now is proof, delivered on the biggest stages against the toughest possible opponents, backed up by cold statistics that leave no room for doubt. The rest of the WTA Tour spent years wondering if this young Filipina star was the real deal. Berlin answered that question. Wimbledon is currently writing the sequel. So here's what I want to know from you. Do you think this is the beginning of a genuine top 10 career, or is there still a gap between potential and consistency that hasn't fully closed yet? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this story is far from finished. And if the pattern we've watched over the last month holds true, we are going to be talking about Eala for a very long time. Make sure you're subscribed, because the next chapter of this run could be written any day now.